Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the strict standing press versus the push press. And really, this video is just going to cover the differences between the barbell exercises and why you would want to pick one over the other. When you start getting into different bars, dumbbells, kettlebells, all this other stuff, it will become a far more nuanced and complex topic. And generally, the core of all of our training is going to be with barbells. Everyone who is training for strength, general fitness, things like that, barbell training is going to be the basis of our training, and then other stuff will oftentimes be accessory movements and things like that. And I'm not saying they don't have their place. These different variations do have their place in training. But when talking about the basics, we usually start with a barbell. And in this case, this is what we're going to talk about. And what I want to chat with you guys a little bit about is why a person might want to pick one of these over the other. And when we ask the question, sometimes people will say things like, well, you could just train both. But that's not always feasible, and it's not always desirable, meaning you wouldn't take a novice lifter and we could argue about the box squat versus the back squat. You're not realistically going to have room for all lifters to program both. In fact, you're going to need to reach a certain amount of work capacity and threshold and a baseline strength before you really even start talking about training multiple variations of a big lift. So really, we need to define why a person might want to choose one of these, and also we should look at what the difference is between them. For those who don't know, the strict press, also just historically called the press, is a generally knees locked, fairly strict barbell press where you start with the bar on your chest or close to your chest, depending upon your mobility. Oftentimes with a slight layback so that you can touch your chest and then clear your face. And then you press it up over your head using minimal to no leg drive, right? And so the knees are mostly locked, either a soft lock or a hard lock to do that. And you are using purely the muscles of your upper body, your pectorals, your deltoids, your triceps, your traps, to move the bar upwards and lock it out. And conversely, the push press, which I will also be showing throughout this video back and forth, you squat down and you use leg drive, meaning a significant amount, usually at least several inches of travel to where your torso dips down, and then you use your quads, your hips, your glutes, and everything to get the weight started up off of the chest, and then you drive through with the triceps, the delts, the traps, all of that. Now, generally speaking, you're going to use a heavier weight on the push press. You're going to be stronger on the push press. And it may not be a lot stronger, but depending upon your skill level with the exercise, in some cases it can approach 10 to 20% more weight. Although when we start talking about anything over 10% more weight, you've probably developed a certain amount of technique there and you're learning to really use leg drive. So the question becomes, which one do we use? And I'm going to tell people, for building your base, right? For building your base, your baseline upper body strength, you should probably do the strict press. And it's not to say that a novice couldn't start with the push press, but usually you're going to need to do the strict press to build the muscles of your shoulders and the movement pattern and all of the muscles involved with the push press in order to get a baseline of strength. And in fact, depending upon whether you're chasing strength versus power, it's my opinion, and opinion of actually a lot of coaches out there, that the strict press is a better strength exercise, whereas in the push press is a better power exercise. And what do we mean between the two? Well, strength is just about how much weight you can lift irrespective of time, and it usually just has to do with total amount of force produced. So in other words, lifting a fairly heavy weight using the muscles of just the upper body. Whereas in power, it has a speed component. It's rate of force production. So it's how fast you can start to accelerate a weight. So the difference between the two is pretty big there. Now, a lot of people would say, well, which one for hypertrophy? And I'd say they're relatively equal. It's just that the ratios are placed a little differently through the body. So for overall hypertrophy, they're fairly equal. For strength, the strict press is a better exercise, but for power and force generation and to some degree athleticism, the push press is going to be better. In fact, there's been studies out there looking at it that found when it comes to using the thighs, particularly the quads, to generate peak force, it actually beats a lot of other lower body exercises, and it's comparable, and in some studies it's shown to be even higher than jump squats. So if you're an athlete who is going to jump, or you're going to be a thrower, or anything like that to where you need force transfer from the lower body to the upper body, whether again it's jumping, throwing an object, whether it's throwing a football, throwing a baseball, throwing a basketball, the push press is usually going to be a superior exercise. So just general athleticism is going to be better. So if someone were to come to me who's going to be a football player or a boxer or an MMA fighter, we would want to get them to where they're doing a push press relatively soon in their training because it's better for general athleticism. But I will have the added caveat there that they should still build a base on the strict press. You need a baseline strength and a baseline proficiency on the strict press before you ever even consider going to the push press. And I would say for people whose goals are purely upper body strength and hypertrophy, who aren't quite as concerned about general athleticism, and particularly who aren't necessarily going to throw objects or punch, things like that, hit someone on a football field, they may not ever need to go to the push press. The strict press may fulfill their needs generally for the rest of their training career. But I would say at the bare minimum, if you can't strict press a full plate per side for at least a couple of reps, so 135 in pounds or 60 kilos, you really don't have the base strength and proficiency to really mess much with the push press, which has its own learning curve. So that's usually what I would say for most people. So we kind of get into the question of, well, which one should you be using for an accessory movement then? Because I've started working the push press and more, but I actually have spent a couple of years developing a strict press that is as strong as possible. And you guys have seen me numerous different times do up to 225. I think the most I've hit on camera is 227.5 on the strict press. So I've spent a lot of time developing the strict press, and I've actually over time used different programming for it. I've even used exercise variations. So I tend to tell people that's where you need to build your base. Now we can get into the question of which one's going to carry over to your bench press better. Subject of great debate, and I think it's going to come down to where you're weakest at on the bench. If you are someone who is still developing a pause bench, in other words, your touch and go bench versus your pause bench are dramatically different and you're very, very weak off the chest, then I think that the strict press or just a standing barbell press is going to be a better exercise for you. Why? It involves a little more chest, right? It involves more chest, and it develops better starting strength because you're oftentimes having to either generate a very short stretch reflex, depending on how you do it, or if you're starting dead stop on the chest like I frequently do, then you're going to have to develop a lot of starting strength using your pectorals and then engaging the triceps more as you go. For someone who is weakest off the chest, which is going to be oftentimes the majority of us for raw bench pressers, it's going to be most of us. If you're weakest off the chest, which I'm actually not at this point, then the strict press is probably going to be the better of the two exercises. Now, if you are very explosive off the chest and you do exclusively pause benching, you don't do much in the way of touch and go, and you've gotten your pause bench to where your pause bench and your touch and go are very close together, you struggle a little more with following through at the top, but you have fantastic force generation and speed off the bottom, and you just need bigger, thicker triceps, the push press might be the way to go. Right? And if you want to be better at just the strict press and the overhead press, you want an exercise that's going to carry over to general overhead pressing and athleticism and a variety of different competitive events, I might lean you more in the direction of the push press. Particularly if triceps are a lagging muscle group for you, I think the push press is arguably one of the best tricep exercises that's out there. And again, that's the reason I'm personally doing it more. And it has to do with the fact that you're getting a slightly different training stimulus there. It is one of the few tricep exercises that does allow for an eccentric overload. And I would tell people eccentric overloading needs to be used very selectively. I'm not an enormous fan of using it all the time. I think that most of the time it is not an efficient way to train, but you get into something like the push press for someone who has seriously lagging triceps, because you're using leg drive to get a weight started and you're then lowering a weight that is already a very tricep dominant exercise, because the standing press is extremely tricep dominant, meaning studies have shown comparing different presses, seated, standing, barbell, dumbbell, that the barbell standing press, because of the nature of it, tends to hit the triceps harder than any other normal overhead press. That is further accentuated with the push press because of the follow through at the top, and then the eccentric overload on the concentric, in which the triceps take a very large brunt of the eccentric loading. So again, for people who maybe struggle with following through on their bench press, rate of force production on the bench press, lockout speed on the bench press, the push press might be a superior exercise. But early on, for most lifters, you're going to be weakest off of the chest 90% of the time, in which case sticking with the strict press is probably the best way to go. And you can always program between the two back and forth, and you can always adjust them based upon your weaknesses and goals. And that's something that people need to keep in mind with these different exercise variations. You don't have to train one exclusively. It doesn't have to be a static situation, because our weak points and our training goals are a very dynamic thing, and they change over time. And our exercise selection and assistance movements will be adjusted over time to accommodate that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.